I lost 1.8 pounds in 2 weeks, and for maybe the first time in my life, I did it without going to war on my own appetite. 2 weeks ago, I told you that I was seriously considering weight loss medication. I was that frustrated. So I gave myself one real test first. 2 weeks, no extremes, no full metal jacket, just the calm, sustainable version I've always believed in, but that didn't produce the results I was looking for yet. Here's exactly what happened and why the fat that I lost might not even be the most exciting part. You're listening to the Set Point Science podcast, the show about what's really driving midlife weight gain and loss, hunger, cravings, and food noise, because you do not need more discipline. You need a strategy that actually works with your current body and the life you're actually living. I'm your host, Cheri, and this is that story. So let me back up and give you the recap real quick. If you remember the last update video, this was the very end of July. I said I was frustrated enough with my lack of weight loss to be seriously considering GLP-1 type medication. But then I remembered my rule about not giving up on what feels like the worst day. And I also realized I hadn't actually had the space to stress test the protocol that I believe works. So I gave it another 2 weeks. It's now August 13th, so 2 weeks later, and I told you back then that if I lost somewhere around 2 pounds in that window, I'd feel confident this was working and worth continuing. So I started on July 31st at 178.2. My most recent weigh-in this past Tuesday was 176.4. So that's 1.8 pounds. Basically, I achieved my goal. Honestly, though, even if it had come in even more below 2 pounds, I still would have counted it as a win, as long as it was moving in the right direction. But if I'd maintained or gained anything over that starting 178.2 over a couple of regular normal weeks, then I'd be taking medication a lot more seriously right now. I'd think it was just my meds or metabolism or life that made it impossible. But now I'm using this loss as proof that under normal circumstances, my sustainable protocol actually helps me lose weight. And I've made videos about this before, and so I knew it was working. I had done a lot of tests, but these setbacks kept throwing me off, which is what led to my frustration. So here's what I actually changed. This wasn't just a food test, if you recall. I decided to also pause my weightlifting completely. I made that decision back on July 9th, and here's why. For a long stretch before this, a year and a half, I was doing heavy, progressive overload lifting, getting stronger, building muscles, and I was testing whether that would raise my metabolism enough to let me run a small deficit that felt manageable. But it didn't work the way I hoped, and I think I know why. The more I lifted, the hungrier I got, to the point where it all basically canceled itself out. And I had noticed during that time that when my girls got sick and had to stay at home, and I was forced to stay home with them and not lift at the gym, I was able to have easier weight loss. And then I'd start back to my previous routine and it got difficult again. So I asked a different question. What if I raised cardio instead and gave a rest to make room for it? That meant testing the treadmill from scratch, figuring out what my foot could actually tolerate right now. It took 2 or 3 weeks to land on my number, which ends up being 1.7 miles per hour, which is slow enough that I can work while I walk, with 2 miles as my real target for distance, and then 2.25 is the hard stop that I don't go past. Not wanting to stress my foot out and wanting to exercise in a way that was not as hard as the weightlifting, so hopefully this would create not too much hunger. I also brought back in swimming. I wanted to be able to replicate the 10,000 steps a day idea, but I couldn't get that done with the way my foot was, so I wanted to add in swimming so it would even out and hopefully not drive that hunger up too much. I lost weight in my 20s one time, specifically while swimming 5 days a week without fail and walking 4 to 5 miles a day. Of course, this was before I had kids and other responsibilities, and I was eating totally normally at that time, including binging still. So the exercise back then clearly wasn't nothing, and I wanted to test bringing swimming back into the mix again, aiming for 4 to 5 days most weeks. And if you recall, I tried to do this back in June. That's when I got that bronchitis and the lung flare. So here I am again, remembering what I was doing and going, oh, let me try that again. And hopefully a set of weeks that's a little more normal. Of course, it helps that now my kids are back in school too. So I have time where I can leave the house each day. So the full physical side of this, walking 4 to 5 days a week for a couple miles while I work, plus 30-minute swim 4 days a week is very sustainable for me. Took me some time to find that though. And then on the food side, nothing dramatic changed at all, but I wanted to make it more of a habit. My usual breakfast approach was 50 grams of protein in the morning, 30 to 50 in the middle of the day, and then 15 to 30 in the evening maybe. That was something I'd already found before, and it created satisfaction, weight loss, and continuity continuity. So I wanted to further cement that as my actual routine, not just something I did when I was on. And the one real shift was making sure I actually ate dinner instead of trying to skip it. That one was a genuine epiphany for me. Not skipping dinner turned out to matter more than I expected and created a lot of real sustainability in my nervous system and in my meals. I also started lightly tracking again so I could be making decisions ahead of time almost every day, which is a big part of my program, instead of just winging it in my head all the time. This sketchbook that I'm showing you is the one that I originally started, I think it was back in 2021 when I was trying to be nutritarian again after my twin pregnancy. I turned it into a little watercolor bullet journal. It makes me really happy. I love doing that, and it helps me unload some of the thoughts I'm having during the day. And back then, I didn't get very far with it because my twins were babies and they wouldn't leave me alone long enough to be able to sit and paint for a little while. But just recently, I remembered that I used to do this. So on July 31st, I picked up that same journal. Each day, I wrote down my hunger level, food noise, energy level, and then this is one I've never tracked before, repeatability. Basically, how did I think it would feel to do this again? Would it be possible to do it again, or did it rely on white-knuckling? I'm also keeping a thoughts section, writing down any extra or off-plan food I ate too, and keeping my to-do list right there on the same page. Around August 7th or 8th, I hit a wall with doing it every single day. Some days I just don't have the time or the inclination, I realized. So then I gave myself permission to skip days and wing it sometimes, especially on weekends. And this is something I did a few months back, if you'll recall, when I decided I wanted to let restaurants be a totally okay part of my weekend life or even during the week life, just because it makes it easier sometimes. And I wanted off-plan stuff and family moments like ice cream or going out to sushi with my daughter to be totally okay on the occasion. My whole family is always home on the weekends, and after fully scheduled weeks, I want zero schedule on the weekends. So I might write down a food plan ahead of time for weekends instead, but the tracking itself doesn't have to happen every day for this to work. It's flexible still. So here's why I'm calling this test a success. I can feel that my body released some fat. It's not a massive visible shift, but I can feel it. My energy's up and my meals have been consistent and easy to repeat. I also picked up 2 new recipes in the process, so I finally perfected my homemade hamburger buns, and the last time I made them, I added some more whole wheat flour too. And then I made some chicken burgers with caramelized onions, and those were a huge hit for my taste buds. And I can batch cook those, freeze a bunch, and just pull them out later, which is exactly the kind of convenience I'm looking for right now. So I'll keep my Whole Foods frozen turkey burgers on hand for times when I haven't made my own burgers, like today. Also, stick around because if you're interested, I'm going to give both of these recipes away at the end of this episode. Now, here's why the flexibility part actually matters. I built all of this to be flexible on purpose, not perfect on purpose. And that's the part I think that matters the most. I just decide on something ahead of time, and if I didn't want it in the moment, I let myself not have it, defaulting instead to eating, but just responding to actual hunger and fullness cues, which is who I actually want to be once I've achieved this weight loss goal. And I want to achieve that in the process. What's important for me is becoming a person who feels it's just natural for me to know what I'm doing, right? Rather than having a strict rule book that I must follow. I don't want to be someone who has to log every single thing that goes in her mouth or have massive control in order to call something a success. There were 3 or 4 days over this 2-week period where the plan completely fell apart. One day I had a doctor's appointment that ran really long and I didn't have food with me. I got home starving and I ate a bunch of stuff that wasn't on plan. They were all fine foods actually, just not what I had written down. And my takeaway from that wasn't, oh, I need to plan better. There's something wrong with me. Because there's no planning for a doctor's appointment that ran long. My takeaway was that it's generally fine to be flexible and default to just hunger and fullness scale some days, because that's the actual skill that I'm building here. The flexibility shows up in how I write the protocol itself too. I put optional extras in parentheses like chocolate, yogurt, or a shake, just in case I want or need more. And then if I don't use those, that's fine. They're just there in case. So over these 2 weeks, I actually wanted chocolate once or twice. Most days, I just wrote it in as an option and I didn't even want it. So that's a real shift for me, going from needing something like that after a meal every day to just not being interested, even with it being fully permitted. I also added more fruit after meals because peaches are insanely good right now, and I've just been enjoying that a lot, and I love that flexibility. So why is this time in my life actually different to me? There's something I want to be really open about here because I think it's the actual point of this whole test. Every time I've dieted in the past, it's come from the same place. Just eat less, move more, and not a little bit less, right? Push as hard as possible, get it moving fast as possible. Full metal jacket, like I say. Strict eat to live, the nutritarian version, or slim fast, 1,200 calories a day, no more. Exercise a lot, never miss a day, right? That's the only way I've ever actually created weight loss in the past, by going all the way to that extreme end. I have never, not once, successfully lost weight from just a small margin plus some easier exercise and realized that it was sustainable. Not once. There was either always too much exercise, not enough food, and then binging, cheat days, all that. Intensity. And every time I've gotten results before, it's because I went to war with my own appetite and won temporarily through sheer force. And if you've been following along, you know that at this age, now I'm 44, I just wasn't able to pull off that intensity anymore. Some people might find that weak, and that's okay. You can have that opinion. For me, I see it as a nervous system who's just done this so many times, it ain't doing it anymore. That's not weakness. That's just how our nervous systems pattern themselves and protect themselves. I've never actually strove for this to be my default, this full calm thing, right? So this 2-week test wasn't really, will this protocol work? It was, can I create any movement on the scale without going to war at all? And I've genuinely never gotten to try that question from where I'm standing right now, because where I'm standing right now didn't exist a few years ago. So here's the ground I'm actually starting from this time that I didn't have before. As I've said, my food noise is naturally lower than it's ever been. I finally stopped not just managing it, not just white-knuckling it. It's actually stopped. And I've also put on 5 to 10 pounds of real muscle. And then working against me at the same time, as you know, the plantar fasciitis, the hormone blocking medications that have their own side effects, a lung condition that can knock me out for months, and solo parenting 3 kids most of the week. I have never once tried to lose weight from this exact combination. More stability around food than I've ever had, and more physical limitations that I've ever had, both at once, without just defaulting to extreme restriction to force it anyway. And I want to say this too, because I think what I'm saying might sound obvious to other people. Eat enough, don't restrict too hard, just find a sustainable middle. Of course, duh. But none of this has ever been obvious or intuitive to me. And I know I speak for a lot of you out there. My nervous system was not previously wired to just make that possible. I'm not a naturally thin person. I'm not someone who's just effortlessly cool around food. I'm a regular person who's had to actually work at every part of this until it becomes natural. Historically, I've only ever really known 2 settings, heavy restricting or the opposite. This middle ground, steady, moderate, actual livable pace is genuinely new territory for me. And I want to be this person forever, not the version of me who's like white-knuckling a diet, chasing perfection, longevity. And I also don't want to be the version of me who's completely given up into full hedonism mode either. I want to be this person right here. It's really only been the last few years that I've been working on how to do this in a way that could last forever, instead of a way that works for 8 weeks and then collapses. So when I say I feel like I don't need a break from this protocol, that is not a small thing for me to say. It might honestly be like the real headline of this update, even more than the 1.8 pounds. Okay, so here's what's next. I believe this protocol works, and it's worth continuing to test it in 2 to 3 week stretches. Here's where I actually am on the number line. So right before I got hit with a lung issue and ended up on prednisone, I was sitting around 175, 176, which is where I am right now. I'd had a few really good days and then gotten down to about 173.4. Then prednisone happened, my weight spiked up to 187, and I've been bringing it back down since. So my next milestone is 173.4, getting back to that pre-prednisone number. It would be satisfying, but actually not the number that would really prove much, because I've hit 173 many times over the last year to year and a half while doing all kinds of things, including the weightlifting approach that didn't ultimately work for me. Though I will be adding more weight training back in slowly, sustainably as time goes on. And I want to take a minute to actually give credit to being able to get back to where I was before my setbacks, because that is real progress. When that scale creeps up, because of stuff that's out of our control, it's easy to let our thoughts drift to, well, this is just my new weight. I'm not going to be able to lose it again. This is just how my body works. But to keep going even after setbacks, that is really something. And it's something that I know you can do too. That being said, the number that actually matters to me at this moment is 169, under 170. So I started weight training back in February 2025, gained about 10 pounds from it within a few months, and I've been stuck in the 170s for roughly 14 months ever since. Getting under 170 for the first time in this stretch is what's going to tell me that this isn't just a temporary dip. It's that the pattern I've found, my actual rhythm, is sustainable. Then after that, 166 is my next marker. That's where my BM chart moves from obese into overweight. My real goal is 30 or 40 pounds down from there, but I'm not trying to hold that whole number in my head at once. I'm going 3 to 4 pounds at a time, 2 to 3 weeks at a stretch. And here's the thing I want to end on. As I said, I don't feel like I need a break from what I'm doing, and I've designed it this way very purposefully. And that's the bulk of what's taking so long. Past weight loss efforts have always felt like a push, a challenge. I have to eat salad every day. I just have to become the person who eats a salad every day, this like white knuckle against what my nervous system wants. And this doesn't feel like that. If I pictured myself at my goal weight, I could still see myself eating roughly this way. And I already have a sense that as I keep going, this is going to naturally shift my appetite towards more vegetables, smaller portions on its own, just from becoming a smaller person over time. Not because I'm forcing it, but because I'm really listening to my appetite and my body, and I'm already seeing that starting to happen. So follow along. And like I mentioned, if you want the recipes for those hamburger buns and the chicken burgers with the caramelized onions, I put them together for you. You can go to setpointscience.com/recipes, drop your email there, and I'll send them straight to you. Until next time, the goal was never to win the war faster. It was to find out if I could stop fighting one at all and still create real results. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.